Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive into some pretty fascinating research.
It is fascinating.
You guys sent in some articles all about salmon and glaciers, and we're ready to unpack it all.
Let's do it.
Okay, so just to set the stage, we're talking about landscapes that were once covered in ice, and now they're like bursting with life.
Yeah, think about it. You have these places like up in Alaska in Glacier Bay National Park, where scientists are tracking all this new life.
So it's not just the salmon then?
Oh, no. It's everything from tiny little insects to those big salmon.
Okay, so Glacier Bay.
Yeah.
What's so special about that spot?
Well, it's kind of a dream location for ecologists because those glaciers have been receding like crazy for over 200 years.
Oh.
It's an incredible landscape. You've got towering mountains, lush rainforests.
That sounds gorgeous.
And these pristine streams just flowing into fjords.
Oh, wow.
It's really something.
And there's this ecologist named Sandy Milner who's been doing some really cool research there.
Milner's a legend. He's dedicated over 40 years to studying how life takes hold in these brand new streams.
Wow, 40 years.
Almost every year since the 70s, he's been going back to Glacier Bay to track these changes.
That is some serious dedication.
For sure.
So it's like those time-lapse videos of plants growing, but on a massive scale.
Exactly.
So walk me through what Milner's actually found. Like, what's the timeline for life returning to these spots?
So one of the streams he's been looking at is called Wolf Point Creek. It emerged from under the ice back in the 1940s.
Pretty recent.
And his research there gives us this really detailed picture of how life colonizes a new stream.
Cool.
It starts small. The first to arrive are these tough little critters called chironomid larvae.
Chironomid larvae.
They're tiny, but they can handle the cold and the harsh conditions.
So it's bugs first?
Pretty much. Then after them come the mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies.
More bugs.
More bugs. It's a sign that the ecosystem is becoming more complex.
So we've got the bugs. What about plants and fish?
They come too, of course.
Okay.
Along the stream banks, you start seeing plants taking root. First, you get these mats of mountain avens. And eventually you have these thick forests of alder and cottonwood trees.
So in just a few decades, you go from bare ice to a full-blown forest.
That's right.
That's incredible. And what about fish?
Well, Dolly Varden char were spotted in Wolf Point Creek in 1987. But the real stars were the pink salmon.
Oh, yeah.
They showed up in 1989.
Pretty soon after the chart.
And their population just exploded. From about 189 to over 10,000 by 97.
That's a lot of salmon.
It is.
So is that typical? Does life always rebound this fast in places like Glacier Bay?
That's a good question, and it gets to the heart of what we call ecological succession.
Okay.
Specifically, primary succession.
Primary succession.
It's the gradual and predictable way that life takes over a brand new habitat.
Like starting from scratch.
Exactly. Like if you had bare rock and then eventually a forest grew.
So like the pictures you see of Mount St. Helens after the eruption, life just slowly starts creeping back in.
Right. And each stage sets the stage for the next.
I see.
But there are actually different models that try to explain how this happens.
Okay.
There's the facilitation model, where early colonizers make things easier for the later arrivals.
Okay.
Then you have the inhibition model, where the early arrivals actually make it harder for others to come in.
Interesting.
And then there's the tolerance model, where everyone can kind of coexist as long as they can tolerate the conditions.
So which model fits with what Milner's been seeing in Glacier Bay?
Well, based on all his data, Milner thinks the tolerance model explains Wolf Point Creek best. He's seen this continuous increase in diversity with very few extinctions.
Okay.
Which suggests that the species are able to coexist without necessarily needing to help each other out or block each other out.
It's a pretty welcoming environment then.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
So you might think life just marches on in.
Yeah.
But it's not always that simple.
Oh.
Wolf Point Creek is pretty stable because it has this high elevation lake that acts as a buffer.
It's like a safety net.
Exactly. But other places in Glacier Bay experience some pretty dramatic changes.
This is where those chance events and disturbances come in.
Exactly. Like take Rush Point Creek, for example.
Okay.
It's over 200 years old.
Much older than Wolf Point Creek.
Right. And unlike Wolf Point, it's prone to serious flooding.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine entire communities of plants and animals getting wiped out by these floods.
That sounds devastating.
Yeah.
So is there any way to predict how those places will recover?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Milner's research shows that the timing of when species arrive is influenced by both chance.
Luck of the draw?
Right, and proximity to a source population.
Makes sense.
So some streams like Stonefly Creek saw salmon arriving within 10 years.
Wow.
While others like Wolf Point Creek took almost 50 years.
That's a big difference. So it's like you need the right conditions, but you also need a bit of luck in terms of who shows up and when.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's this mix of predictable factors and random events that makes ecological succession so fascinating.
Totally. So we've got glaciers, receding ecosystems popping up, and a whole lot of salmon joining the party.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect to the bigger picture of climate change?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Are these new streams a good thing for salmon?
Especially with their old habitats under threat.
Exactly. And that's something researchers like Cara Pittman, John Moore, and their colleagues have been looking into.
Okay.
Their research predicts that by 2100, glacier retreat could create over 6,000 kilometers of new salmon habitat.
Whoa, that's huge. Does that mean they'll be all right even with climate change happening?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
While these new streams up north could be good news, we have to think about what's happening in the ocean.
Oh, right, because salmon spend a lot of their lives out there. What kind of changes are they facing in the ocean?
Well, the water's getting warmer, there's ocean acidification,
right,
and changes in what they eat.
All of which could impact their survival.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if they have more places to spawn if the ocean becomes unlivable.
So it's a mixed bag for the salmon. Some might benefit from these new glacial streams, but it's not a guaranteed win.
And it's important to remember that salmon aren't just a species. They're a crucial resource for a lot of people.
Especially indigenous communities who've relied on them for centuries.
Exactly. What happens to the salmon directly affects those communities.
And speaking of indigenous communities, there's a specific story that illustrates this really well.
The Gitnao First Nation in British Columbia.
Yeah, what's happening there?
Well, they've been experiencing these shifting salmon populations firsthand. Their traditional fishing grounds in the Hannah and Tintina rivers are drying up because of climate change.
Oh, no.
And the salmon are moving to these cooler streams like Strone Creek, which is fed by the melting Bear Glacier.
So the salmon are adapting, going where they can survive. But what does that mean for the Gitnao people who depend on them?
It's a complicated situation, and it's something we'll explore in the next part of your deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
So we were talking about how climate change is forcing those salmon to find new homes, even up north in those streams created by melting glaciers.
Right.
And it sounds like the Gitnao First Nation is really having to adjust to this new reality.
They are.
What kind of challenges are they up against?
Well, the Gitnao have always relied on the salmon from the Hannah and Tintina rivers.
Those were their traditional fishing grounds.
Exactly. For generations. But now those rivers are drying up.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and the salmon are moving to these cooler streams.
Like Strone Creek.
Yeah.
Which is good for the salmon, I guess.
All right.
But what does it mean for the Gitnao people who rely on them?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Okay.
I mean, it's positive that there are still salmon available in Strone Creek.
Right. At least they still have that food source.
Yeah. But it raises some tricky questions about land rights and resource management.
Because if the salmon are moving to a different area, who gets to fish there?
Exactly.
And how do they make sure those fish are being managed sustainably?
Exactly. Those are the very questions the Gitnao are grappling with right now.
It's tough.
It is. To try to protect this new habitat, they've declared the Mesaean Indigenous Protected Area.
Okay.
But the British Columbia government hasn't officially recognized it yet.
Oh, wow.
And then you've got mining interests in the area.
Which adds another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. It's this whole web of ecological and social challenges.
All tangled up together.
It really highlights how we can't just focus on the science of ecological succession.
Right. We have to consider the human side of things, too.
Exactly. Because people are part of the ecosystem.
Not separate from it.
Right. Their lives and traditions are connected to the natural world.
It makes me think about those glaciers.
Yeah.
They're not just creating new streams.
No, they're not.
They're shaping landscapes and impacting people's lives in huge ways.
And they're revealing secrets of the past, too.
What do you mean?
Well, as they melt,
scientists
are finding remnants of these ancient forests that have been buried under the ice for thousands of years.
It's like a time capsule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It gives us this glimpse into how ecosystems have changed over really long periods.
That's amazing. So we're not just seeing how life is adapting now, but also getting clues about how it's changed over millennia.
Exactly. Yeah. And it helps us understand the long-term impacts of climate change.
And the resilience of life.
Absolutely.
This has been a wild ride so far.
It has.
From tiny bugs colonizing a stream
Right.
to salmon looking for a new home
Right.
to communities having to adapt to a changing landscape.
It really shows how everything is connected.
It does. So what are some ways that communities are adapting to these shifts in salmon populations?
Well, there are some really inspiring examples out there.
Okay, tell me more.
Some communities are focusing on restoring habitats,
Okay.
improving fish passage, or diversifying their fishing practices.
So it's about finding ways to be flexible.
Exactly. Building resilience into their way of life.
And are there any communities working with scientists to find solutions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They're combining traditional knowledge with modern science.
To get a better understanding of these changing ecosystems.
Exactly. It's a powerful partnership.
I like that. So we've explored the science, the human side of things, and now we're seeing some glimmers of hope in how people are adapting.
That's right.
But I'm curious about the bigger picture again.
Yeah.
How do these changes in glacial streams and salmon populations affect the planet as a whole?
That's where the idea of cascading effects comes in.
Okay.
As glaciers melt and ecosystems change, it creates ripple effects that go way beyond that specific location.
So it's not just about the glaciers and the salmon.
No, it's a whole chain reaction.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Changes in freshwater runoff from melting glaciers can affect ocean currents,
Wow.
nutrient cycles, even global weather patterns.
Really? It's all connected.
It is.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we can't ignore these interconnected systems.
What can we do then?
Well, it comes down to responsible stewardship of our planet's resources, reducing our carbon footprint,
Right.
switching to renewable energy, adopting more sustainable practices.
It's about realizing that we're caretakers of this planet.
Exactly. What we do today affects what we leave behind for future generations.
That's a good way to put it. And I think that leads us perfectly into the final part of this deep dive,
I think so too.
where we'll talk about solutions and what we can all do to address these complex challenges.
I'm looking forward to it.
We've learned so much in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
From those glaciers reshaping the landscape to salmon finding new homes in communities like the Gitniao, facing those real-world impacts.
It has.
It's incredible to see nature's power to regenerate, but also a little bit daunting to see the disruptions these changes bring.
It's true. We see that in Wolf Point Creek, where life rebounded so quickly, but then there's the Gittinel facing those challenges with their salmon.
It feels like we're at this point where we need to figure out how to handle these changes in a way that works for everyone.
For people and the planet.
Exactly. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it starts with changing our perspective.
Okay.
We tend to see nature as something separate from us.
Something to study or even exploit.
Right. But the reality is, we are part of nature.
We're all connected.
We're woven into that web of life.
It's like that quote, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves.
Exactly. Recognizing that connection is key to finding solutions.
So how do we put that into practice?
It starts with valuing different viewpoints. We need to listen to indigenous communities.
Okay.
Scientists, policymakers, local communities.
Bring everyone to the table.
Exactly. And work together to find solutions that make sense scientifically and culturally.
Collaboration is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need a more holistic way of managing resources.
What do you mean?
Instead of just focusing on one species or one ecosystem,
Okay.
we need to consider how everything is connected.
Look at the whole picture.
Right. And find solutions that benefit the whole web of life.
So it's not just about protecting individual pieces.
No, it's about understanding how those pieces fit together.
And how our actions have those ripple effects.
Exactly. And it's about being responsible stewards of our planet.
Which means?
Reducing our carbon footprint.
Okay.
Switching to renewable energy.
Uh-huh.
And just adopting more sustainable practices in our lives.
It's about making choices that benefit future generations.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that brings me to my final thought.
Okay.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this.
Yeah. Climate change can feel pretty huge.
But we all have a role to play in creating a better future.
We can all make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether it's changing our daily habits,
Right.
speaking up for change,
Okay.
or supporting those organizations working to protect the planet.
Every action counts.
It really does.
Well said. Well, on that note of hope and action, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring glaciers, salmon, and all those connections with us today.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a future where both people and nature can thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the world around us.